hope you're having an awesome day. Are you as excited as me for episode 300? Woohoo! I am pumped, okay? This is going to be an epic episode. I know you are going to love it because it's the first time that I have 4 guests on. Don't ask me how I was able to arrange all of that, but we've got 4 of the previous guests that I know you guys absolutely loved. So thank you so much for being here. I'm excited to be here talking with you. Lisa, you want to start first. You were in episode 173, a really cool episode. You're going to want to go back and listen to that. But Lisa, you want to tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. So thanks for having me back on the show, ST. I really appreciate being invited back on. So my name is Lisa Mustard. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in the great state of South Carolina. And I'm also a life coach for women 35 plus who want to live their best lives and might be struggling a little bit in love, health, wealth, relationships. So thanks for having me back.
Oh, yes, of course. Okay. Next up, we have Dr. April Brown from episode 202. That one was also a really good episode. Dr. April, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm Dr. April, and I'm a relationship and sex therapist here in Fort Myers, Florida, and I offer intimacy retreats. Thanks again for having me.
Yes. Okay. And then we have from episode 210, Dr. Michael Moats. Thank you so very much. Do you know that whenever I think of your episode, I still get chills? It was, we went quite deep in there. So if you didn't listen to that one, I think that one's going to be your first one.
You bet. Yeah. So Michael Moats, clinical psychologist, live in the Colorado Springs area. I deal primarily with grief and trauma. And especially with having 5 military installations here and being second to DC with government contracting, we have more than our share to go around. And just love working with people, trying to reconnect to life, to each other, and in the process of redefining what their life looks like.
Well, thank you so very much for being here. Last, but most definitely not least, we have Sharon McCormick. I think I pronounced that correct. I might not. I don't know.
McCormick, like the spices.
Okay, I messed up everyone so bad. From episode 238, that also was an awesome one. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you very much for having me. I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist, but I practice here in Westport, Connecticut. I see individuals, couples, and families, but mainly couples. I do a decent amount of eating disorder work, and mainly stay with adults other than my eating disorder work. Don't see a lot of children or teens. Haven't for a while. But I'm very happy to be here and to hear the words of your other guests. This is very exciting. More exciting than the one-on-one thing, I have to admit.
I agree so very much. Okay, so let's get right to it. Our very first question is from Emily, and she says, I've been married for 3 years and I'm now about to have a baby. I am super nervous about how this will affect our relationship. Yes, we spoke about it probably almost every day, but what else can I do to make sure that our marriage still stays great?
I guess I'll say something. I guess my first thought is how they would define great. Because otherwise, what are they holding on to, right? So they have to be really clear about what they're holding on to. And I think that's the first step in making sure they maintain it. That's my first thought.
Yeah, if you don't know what you're going for in any area of your life, then you're just going to get everywhere.
Yeah, and I'm gonna jump on what Sharon said. And I love how you said that, define what is great, know ahead of time and have a conversation around what is great. And then also, I can remember being I'm just use my own experience, being in her shoes, knowing that let's not pretend having a baby changes everything. And it, it really truly does. And so what are your hopes and what are your fears? And are you able to have a conversation around that? And as things progress in your pregnancy, how open are you with, or how do you feel about, being vulnerable with your partner, with your spouse about, what you're really worried about or scared about? And I think that's really important to have those conversations. Everything's probably you can have the conversation and the baby comes and everything changes, but at least you've started that process. And so now you can kind of, okay, now we're in the next stage. Let's talk some more about it.
Yeah, I would just piggyback on that one small thought, and that is that the conversations are great, and figuring out what's good, what are we trying to hold on to, maybe what do we want to change too, going forward. But I think there should be very clear expectations that they might not be able to predict what it's going to look like at all once they have that baby. So they should be open to things that they could not have predicted, not try to sort of over, analyze it and figure it all out in advance, because I think there's a lot that you get surprised by.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. I would follow up with Sharon and Lisa, and I would add making sure you start to talk about support systems, because that impacts a lot of how everything else works out in a relationship, and not getting overwhelmed and having someone to help out, to babysit, to do a variety of things. So,
and above all, or not above all, sorry, it sounded wrong. Listen to what the experience is. As we said, we're having the conversations beforehand. We're coming back, checking in with each other, but not just looking at where we want to go, but where are we at? Let's listen to those experiences and understand that we're going to have different takes on it. Generally speaking, as male and females, because we're taught so many different biases of what we're supposed to be doing or what we're not supposed to be doing, and really trying to understand each other rather than just try to compare or be competitive. Really, even the vulnerability piece takes an awful lot of courage for both partners.
There's a lot of conversations going on here, but even more than that, like I like to say before any sort of communication, there's got to be a self-awareness. So really understanding where you are, where's your relationship at this moment, and where we want to head to the future.
Yeah.
Okay. So our next question is from Abby. I know it's normal to fight, but it still bothers me every time we do. I expect more of myself. What tips can you give me to reduce the amount of fighting that we have?
If you don't mind, I'll jump in on this one. My first thought is to make it productive, because too often we're not taught how to fight with each other. And that's one of the things I'd mentioned before, is that's one of the greatest things we can do in our trust building, is learning how to fight with our partner rather than fight our partner. And when we make it productive, we start to not fear it so much. We start to see the value in being able to, again, respectfully wrestle, if you will, with one another. And in there, you start to understand that every argument, every conflict is not a threat against your marriage. It's actually a strength building opportunity. And so making it more productive, and I'll come back to listening. First of all, we are so quick to listen for our response or how to defend, instead of trying to listen to understand, which doesn't mean we have to give up our opinion or where we stand. It just means we're trying to hear where the other person's at. And sometimes we can build more of a side bridge, even if we don't agree with them, we at least understand where they're coming from. Yeah.
And I would add on to what Michael was saying about making these sort of repair conversations productive. Mm-hmm. I think the main way you make it productive is by sucking as much of the emotion out of it as possible.
Yes.
I think the more you're speaking objectively about what the matter is and what each person's stance is, minus the judgment, I think that's how you get to productivity. And also, just to comment on what you were saying before about if you could go into it without getting ready to defend yourself. And, I like to tell all my couples, assumptions need to go out the window. No assumptions. I think that's a dangerous practice. And then the last thing I would say to this person who wrote the question, maybe you could read to me what she said. Oh, she said, I expect more of myself. That sounds like, that needs to be looked at. Mm-hmm. If she's going into these things feeling, with some sort of judgment of herself, that's not a great place to start.
Yeah. And I would go off from what you said in the sense about the emotions, that sometimes as couples or people, we get flooded. And recognizing when you start to get upset and when you get flooded, recognize it in your body, what it feels like, and learning how to take breaks to calm yourself down, because it is your job to calm yourself down. It's not your partner's job. And once you're able to do that, and sometimes that takes, of course, more than 20 minutes, then you're able to come back and have a conversation. But learning yourself and how you get upset and what that feels like, and learning how to take what I call timeouts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that idea. That reminds me of triggers, reminds me of, can you identify what's maybe triggering you to feel like you should expect more of yourself? There's some work there. I think everybody, Sharon said it, agrees that what's going on internally that you feel like you should, there's that should, we don't let other people should on us, but we do all the time. And I mean, I'm totally guilty of that. And that's where the individual work could come in for her. And just maybe kick that around a little bit, because that could be an obstacle for her to have better, talks or discussions or even arguments with her husband.
It's very likely coloring the interaction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Always, all the work really ends up going back on yourself, and then the marriage will change, because otherwise. Okay. Our next question is from Rachel. My love language is quality time. My husband knows that and tries his best to give it to me, but for some reason, I never feel that it's enough.
I think she really needs to look at what her love language is. Maybe she needs to take the quiz again, or maybe she needs to reevaluate what quality time she's talking. Like, what does that look like for her? Because if he's not able to meet her need, maybe she's not explaining it well enough, or maybe she's just unsure. I don't know.
Yeah.
Once again,
I agree. A better definition of what that quality time is. And what about what he's giving her is not enough, or can be improved in some way.
Yeah. Without obviously knowing the person, I'm totally hypothesizing here, but my first flag that pops up is that you're expecting too much from someone to fill you up. And again, knowing a love language, hugely important. But it sounds like there is almost too great of an expectation of, you need to give this to me, instead of some of the, I don't know. That's where I would dig around. Let me put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And back to the work on yourself.
Yeah. I think everything begins and ends in the mirror.
Yeah, I would agree. There's a lot of questions in that question there that needs to be kind of answered. And if the couple has really sat there and defined exactly what quality time is and how does it look and how much. And also sometimes people feel uncomfortable about spending time with themselves. So yes. I'm not sure if that is part of what's going on also.
I just want to give an example. Like with my love language, I used to tell my husband it was quality time. So he would sit with me but it was never enough. And what I really wanted was him to watch the kids so I could go have my own time. So, you got to have that conversation. Like, what does that look like for the person who wrote the letter, or ask the question? I don't know. Just
yeah. So did you figure that out, like through taking the quiz again or through conversation? Like, how did you get to that conclusion?
I think as I've grown, as he's grown, as our marriage has grown and we had kids, everything just changes, and there's nothing wrong with change. You just got to realize like it changes. So I think I took the quiz again, and then we had a conversation, and then I realized what was really going on, and it has changed as our kids have grown too. So so it was just conversation and take the quiz again.
Yeah. And I think this is just a piece of really a broader conversation, because the thing about the love languages, they're great, right? It's a nice framework, but I think everybody fits somewhat into each one. And I think sometimes we try and say, oh, well, this is mine, but I think we're all we all want a little bit of all those things, right? So it's good to talk about exactly what you want in those different categories. Maybe you don't need so many gifts, but something else might be more important. I think sort of a more thorough conversation around love languages can be helpful versus being, thinking about it in a narrow way, this is mine. And that's just a thought.
Yeah. I think Dr. Gary Chapman talks about it, how we each have some of all five. And more than that, a healthy person can give and receive love in all five. So even if their love language is quality time, but they're giving a gift, they understand that this is coming from a place of gift. But what's also interesting is, besides for the fact that we all have all of them and we all should be able to notice them, is that, like you said, we each want it, like, let's say, quality time in different ways. So some people need quality time, like sit down, we're just like talking and nothing else. And some people need to go and have fun together and do different things. Mm-hmm. So we actually did like 2 different episodes on the love language. One was together with the Enneagram and comparing that to that, like your motives and how you go in life together with the love languages. And another one with like the DISC and like the 4 like type of personality types. DISC, and comparing that to love languages. Again, obviously, this is no like rules putting you in boxes. It's not the point. The point is just to find more ways so that way you could learn more about yourself and your marriage. Okay, our next question, I think a very common one. This one's from Tony. My wife is a very positive person and I'm really negative. Sometimes I like it. I mean, that's why I liked her to start off with. But sometimes I get really nervous with her. And then there are also times that sometimes I feel like I'm bringing her down. So he has these 3 different situations that he's constantly feeling himself in. What should I do?
You repeat the question again?
Yes.
You had a lot of different things in there.
A lot of detail. I know, because I put in my own things instead of just reading it. Sorry about that. Okay. My wife is a very positive person and I'm a really negative. Sometimes I really like it. This is why I liked her to start off with. Sometimes he likes it. Sometimes he gets very nervous with it, the fact that she's very positive. And sometimes I feel like I'm bringing her down. What should I do?
I wonder if he's asked her how she feels about his negativity, if that's a conversation they've even had. But once again, it's kind of like going back to what did he learn growing up about negative and positive people, or, looking at himself and kind of trying to figure out the meaning that he's made around positive people versus negative people. And there's a lot there I think you could unpack. That's my first thought.
Yeah. And I agree with that, because perhaps there's a judgment being made about being positive versus negative, and then maybe a little bit of feeling less than, because he used the word nervous, right? So I just wonder if he's feeling a little bit less than compared to her because he's the negative one. I would think there's some place to go there with him, with his individual work.
Yeah, and I would look at maybe trying to figure out where his negativity is coming from. Is it out of fear? Or it's something in his past, it's negative of the past or the future, if it's worrying. Has he thought about journaling it out or speaking, with a therapist is something I would think about.
Yeah, because sometimes we wear our fear just simply as a shield. And, because we don't know, open spaces are terrifying. Unless you have a good core strength in yourself and you really get the horse before the cart instead of the other way around. And that's what I heard in all those questions. I kept hearing the same theme of I'm afraid. And of course, that's not okay when you're a guy. It's socially unacceptable to be afraid. And so we often cover things up. We hang things around other people's necks. We do a lot of, not intentionally inappropriate, but it's inappropriate shifting of responsibility. And that's even part of what I heard is I want my wife to start. And it's like, well, it's okay to share that, but to kind of have that expectation puts a really heavy weight around her. And so back to the facing your fear of imagine your life, even for a moment, just that you are happy. What comes up? My guess is he's going to have a momentary bit of happiness and followed by a quick amount of fear. And even there, just kind of starting to dive in, what would life look like without that friend, which is anxiety, that has protected you? Maybe also has cut you off from life somewhat, but that's what it is. It's just really kind of a maladaptive coping mechanism of trying to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
sorry. I would agree with what you're saying. You made me think of something else. And that is that I don't think men and women, I'd like to hear what you guys think. I don't think men and women do a good job of understanding what drives the other gender's fears.
Yeah.
So you're sort of left to deal with it in your relationship. But I think there's a big divide there.
Yeah, would agree.
You want to share with us some of the differences so people could start noticing it?
Well, something, that's very common around here. This is a very affluent area where I'm practicing. And it's very difficult to exist here on one income. But there are some families who try and do it. So the male, in most cases, is the primary breadwinner, and the female is staying at home and raising the children. And the amount of pressure that men in that position feel is so through the roof. And I don't think women, a lot of the clients I've seen have very little appreciation for it. And I think, that's what I thought of when you were talking, Michael. I think it's hard really to understand the other gender's perspective when you haven't grown up like that at all. And then, of course, it comes down to the communication we've been talking about all along, right? The more that you could understand the other person's pain through productive conversations, the much more likely you're going to get your pain heard and understood by, your spouse.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have seen much of that, what I just described.
Yeah, it's one of the things that I often, because I probably spend more time trying to educate guys because I do it in a more male sort of way, especially if the wife's not in the room, because then you have male egos and respect and all that stuff. And if it's just guy to guy, I can be rougher with them and they take it and they're like, yeah. But that's just it. That's one of the things that I see. And of course, I'm being generalized here. Is men are, although the younger generations are getting better at it. Historically, even my generation in particular, it was suck it up, rub some dirt on it, walk it off, boys don't cry, all that stuff. And so we're taught a very linear process, problem, solution. And in particular, when females come and, ask a husband something, automatically that guy goes, oh, problem, solution, here's your answer. And most of the time women are going, I didn't need an answer. I was just talking.
Right.
I got this. And,
or they hear it as a complaint, excuse me. Or they hear it as a complaint and launch into defensiveness.
Yes. And the other piece is that even if they do give a solution, now there's this silent obligation that you're supposed to do it the way I said it. Because if you don't, well, then why'd you ask me? Because again, now I feel helpless again. And so there's this constant shame factor that gets triggered through a sense of helplessness, which is part of the whole guys aren't supposed to be afraid. Guys aren't supposed to do this and that. I think it's the same with women. I just think it gets expressed differently. But yeah, it's so they don't know what to do with all of this stuff because it's just, well, here's a problem. And if you're not going to listen, then don't bring me the problem because I don't know how to deal with that emotion. And so that's part of that, trying to understand each other's, what are the pressures you feel. That's what I think a lot of guys, they don't even understand themselves, let alone trying to understand what their partner's going through. They just know I got to succeed or I'm a failure. It's kind of that all or nothing.
Mm-hmm. So what would you recommend someone in such a situation to do?
Oh, I'm sorry. Say it one more time.
What would you recommend for someone in such a situation?
Honestly, I would say individual, of course, obviously being a mental health professional, I'm going to say individual work. But I'm going to say also find some older mentors that you see that have successful marriages, not conformist marriages, but successful partnerships, and get some advice from some of those kind of battle-ridden marriage warriors, if you will, that know what it takes to really work with your partner, because most likely they're going to say, I had to learn to I had to learn to suck it up and let go of the ego a bit.
Yeah. And I think slowing down for everybody, right? And sort of that living consciously position, because we're all on autopilot, right? Men are thinking the way you described, Michael, and women are thinking the way they are. And it's that autopilot mode that makes us miss everything, right? And so we lose, good self-awareness, and we're not checked in with our partner at all. So slowing down is a good thing.
Yeah, Lisa or Dr. April, do you have anything else to add to that?
No, I think she made a great point about being more mindful, being in the present moment, because sometimes that impacts everything when you've checked out because you're too much worried about the future or the past. So definitely.
Yeah, I really like that. Great advice.
I think also, as Michael said earlier, but really understanding where the fear is coming from, we'll be able to just all of a sudden things fall into place and you just understand, and you're like, oh, that makes sense. It's not that they're trying to be mean to me, but they had this sort of trigger or they're worried about this sort of thing. So that's the reason why they're acting this way.
And actually, there can be had a very good unemotional conversation about how society puts different pressures on the different genders, right? That could be sort of a safe place to go, right? You can look at that objectively.
It's not personal, so it's
right.
in general.
Right.
Yeah, 100%. Okay. Our next question is from Jay. This is a bit of a broader question, and I'm actually super curious too. It says, I'm curious to hear, what are the most common marriages issues that therapists see on a daily basis?
So
it'll be interesting to see if you guys match up, or each person, because you deal with different crowds, deal with different things.
It's interesting because it's such a broad question. I have a broad answer. I mean, I think it's couples come together, they bring all this baggage from their past, and they come together and they try to, they're forming this unit now, and they're moving forward. And it's whatever baggage they have from their past that they didn't work through or process through, it's going to show up in their marriage. So whatever that is for that couple is going to be the theme. Now, I feel like every couple, and I work primarily with a military branch, the one thing that they always say to me is we need communication skills. And so I love that, because they come because they want to learn how to talk to each other better is what they're saying. Now, they each have a different idea of what communication skills should look like. But usually by the time we've done a couple sessions, we've gotten to what the theme is. And it's fear, it's shame, it's guilt, it's worry, it's depression, it's all of these things that they bring in, that they funnel into their relationship with the person that they hold dearest to them. So that's my broad answer. First, that's my experience.
I have a broad answer, but a specific answer. Since I focus on intimacy, they all come to me because of intimacy. But intimacy, of course, is more than just sex. So kind of just like Lisa's saying, they have communication problems, usually a lot, emotional stuff going back and forth. And through, I'm Gottman certified. Loneliness is one of the main reasons why couples come into therapy. And loneliness can have its ugly head in a lot of different ways. That's what I kind of see in the sense of couples coming to counseling.
I would agree with what Lisa was saying about how people are coming together with sort of their own contextual factors, right? It's that combination, how well that combination works, that will, define the marriage in many ways. And I spoke to a psychologist not too long ago who said to me, he said, Sharon, marriage is about managing differences, right? Because every couple's going to have differences, right? So in the beginning, when you first meet each other and it's, the honeymoon period and everybody feels so elated, the focus is more on the things that you're alike about, the similarities. I just met my person, we want to do the same things, we like the same food, all these things. But as time goes on and life's stressors kick in, the differences become more obvious. And the couples who can learn to manage those differences with productive conversation are the ones who do better. And that the hope is by the time you get to middle age, that it's not so much about managing the differences, but actually appreciating them. You know, I know I'm divorced. I know if I didn't marry, you know, I was more of a spender. My ex-husband was more of a saver. If I didn't marry somebody who was a saver, I wouldn't have a lot of the things that I have in my life now. So unfortunately, I didn't come to appreciate that soon enough. But you guys understand what I'm saying. So so I think to keep in mind, we're going to be different on some dimensions, and we have to find healthy ways to manage those, not judge each other, but manage those.
Yeah, and my answer would just be a blend of all of them, because it's the same thing as and it may be just a matter of words, but I find the number one issue being acceptance, which speaks to that. And communication is such the medium that it often gets the number one position. So, you know, for me, I don't really care which one, as long as we're working on both of those, because they're both going to help you. I find so many marriages that literally are, I'm going to borrow a line from Bill Engvall, the comedian, but they're like 6 degrees off cool. I mean, they literally are just so close, and they just got this one theme, if you will, that the longer they travel it, the wider it gets and the wider it gets, until they can't even hardly see each other anymore. And they're just wore out. And they go, but what about this and this and this and this? And it's like, well, it all kind of funnels back to the same thing. You know, back to even, I think, Sharon, I think you said that earlier about slow down. I think if they can just slow down and, you know, go back to that, just hear each other, try to understand each other. You don't have to change each other. Matter of fact, you kind of do each other a disservice when you're trying to change each other. Yes. Learn how to work those differences to where you really make a strong team. You're exponentially better when you have differences, when you know how to work them and you tie them together. And I think intimacy, and agreed, sex is such a small part of that. I think intimacy is where that's at. It's in those quiet moments. It's in that just, you're scared to death, you're mad at each other, and you just sit there and hold each other's hand, just as a reminder, we're on the same team. I don't like you right now, but we're going to weather this and we're going to figure it out. And that, to me, that's where that real intimacy comes in. And so even beyond verbal communication, that alone will say more than you can ever speak.
Yeah. And also I think a good example of true intimacy is when each member of the couple has done the work to really be clear on what they need and don't need, but what they need to feel heard, understood, accepted, and loved. And if you're clear about that and each of you communicate it with each other, that's really intimate, I think.
Yes, and to go off what you said, Sharon, that even that self-intimacy of that self-love, because many couples or people, I just even say, sometimes they don't love themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, and how that plays out.
How are we giving the love if we don't have it? Somewhere to give it from. Yeah. Well, that acceptance part really got me, because I don't know. I think that is one of our, if we would have that, all our problems will basically be solved. Not really, but so many of them. So just acceptance of self together with that self-love, and acceptance of your partner, and acceptance of everyone else in this world. So there's always a reason why they have or something. Okay. Next question. This is from an anonymous person who says, besides for the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 method of, 5 things to see, 4 things to think, what other tips do you have for calming down of an overload or flood of emotion, like you said before?
I would say one thing is to journal, and you don't have to keep it. I'm not saying you read this stuff. You just put it out. You just put it out on paper, whether you write journal, color journal, voice journal. The point is to get it out. I think is one way. And also, of course, to work out. Sweating it out also helps.
In the moment, if you're being flooded in the moment, I think getting practiced at locating where it is in your body that it's happening. Right? I mean, some people feel it in their throats, in their chests, in their gut. But if you can sort of locate and focus in on where that activity is happening, then I think any sort of timeout or breathing through it, or is much more effective. So,
one thing I really like this one really helps me. And everything everybody said is very helpful. And the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is helpful too. I just, when I'm starting to feel anxious or have like I start to feel it, because I feel it in my chest first, and then I start to kind of get warm. I just go, hey, it's a thought. It's just a thought I'm having, and I can just watch that thought, and I can just let it go. Because the happy times are very similar. It's just a thought. It's just a feeling. You don't have to let it control everything. And then that gives me just clarity and peace. And then once I kind of move through it, I'm like, okay, what was that about? Like, why did I get so anxious about what just happened? Or because something triggered me to have that thought or that feeling. So I'm going to explore it. But I think we spend a lot of time so caught up in the anxiety or in it that we can choose not to. And I think that's a wonderful skill to learn, when you're ready to learn it. Some people from what I notice is some people really like being anxious. It gives them energy. It's energy for them. It gives them something to talk about. It's something to hold on to. And maybe I'm going a little bit
the fear.
Yeah. Maybe I'm going a little bit too much with this.
No. It's true.
I don't think you are. I think
okay.
For some, it becomes part of their identity.
Yeah. I have anxiety.
Yeah.
We've all got it.
It's like almost like a badge of pride.
And so my challenge to you is honey, we all have anxiety. It's just, what do we choose to do with that thought? Are we going to let it run our afternoon, or are we just going to choose to see it as a thought that we have control over what we do with it next? So maybe that's, I don't know, a little harsh, but that works. It works really well for me. And I'm teaching my kids that too. So
yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think in general, the framework is, get yourself to a calmer place physiologically, so you can do some of the cognitive work, like Lisa, you were saying, recognizing what's happening here. Well, I see what I'm doing. I know how to do this. I've been doing it for years. And, if you could calm yourself physiologically and start having those sort of clear thoughts, recognizing it, then you're well poised to problem solve. Then you're well poised to say, all right, how do I want to handle this situation? And I think to some people that sounds cumbersome, that sort of framework, but I've noticed that the more you do it, the less you have to do it.
Right. Right.
Absolutely. Yeah. I agree. It's that I tend to tell my clients, lean into it. I'm like, stop trying to get it to go away.
Right.
Listen to it. Don't marinate in it. That's different. But listen to it. Ask it questions. Treat it as if it's another entity, if you will, and say, what the hell's going on with you? What do you keep pecking me in the side of the head for? I was perfectly fine. What are you trying to tell me here? And it is that the more you lean in and learn to trust yourself in the midst of the storm, the less impact the storm has on you. It's not that it doesn't affect you. It's not that you're not afraid, but you start to trust you and say, you know what, it's okay if I'm afraid. That there's nothing wrong with that. Instead of us labeling these what we call negative emotions, they're only negative if you let them run wild and unchecked. Beyond that, they're all useful. So embrace them. Start to study them, and you'll be better prepared. The phrase I use a lot of just kind of country phrases, if you will, the simplistic stuff, because it just kind of punches people and they don't usually get to run from it very quick. But it's, I say, the sea captain who thinks he controls the ocean never comes home. You got to go out there and get wet. You got to stand at the helm with your legs shaking. And in that, you'll learn how to navigate the sea, knowing you've never controlled it anyway, but you will be more successful at navigating it.
Yeah. I mean, it's the concept of exposure therapy, right? And just leaning in, like you were saying, Michael, just leaning in is like popping the balloon, right? the anxiety can't sort of stay alive.
Yes.
If you're leaning into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love this. I love this so much that I am going to be a little selfish and drop a different question to put in one of my questions based on what Dr. Michael just like mentioned this, saying something. Okay. Our final question was meant to be, how do you define love? Now, quite a while back, like all the way back in the beginning of the podcast, we had a bit of a debate. What's the difference between love and like? And there was never really good, like explanations of it. And maybe you guys here, such a good guest, could each give your definition of what's the difference between love and like, and how you could actually not like someone, but actually be loving them, or vice versa at the same time.
That's a tough question.
Yeah.
I know, right?
And my first thought is there's a difference of degree. That's my first thought. Also, I mean, love seems to be the thing you can't make happen. You can start to like somebody if they meet your criteria. They check the boxes, could like them and have a good time with them and respect them. But the love thing seems to be something that can happen whether or not the boxes are checked. It seems to be a little bit less within our control. That's my first thought.
Yeah, my first thought came about sacrifice. That's what I was thinking, that when I love something, I sacrifice for it versus when I just like something. I don't know. That was one of my thoughts.
I go back to shared values. I feel like love, I can, and I just use myself as an example. I think about like the guy I was dating before I met my future husband. He was great. I liked him. I mean, maybe I said I love you. I don't know. But when I met my husband, there was something so different. It was like shared values, things in common, mutual respect, positivity. I mean, I don't know. There's an attraction there for me and him, but then there's also like the love that you have with your children and with your parents. So gosh, that is such a good question. But I love what Dr. April said about sacrifice, because I will sacrifice for my children in a heartbeat,
I think I didn't say this before, but I think something else that's in there is the word ease. I think if it's love, it's easier.
Easier to sacrifice, or the love is easier?
Easier. The relationship's easier. I think it's easier to communicate. I think it's easier to ask for what you need.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question on that. Let's say someone has a child who's a very, I guess, difficult child, or they have a lot of issues or whatever, and they say they love the child, but the relationship isn't very easy. This child's a teenager who does.
Oh yeah, I got one of those.
Yeah, we think
she's 13.
You sacrifice for them.
Yeah. I mean, I love her. I don't always like her at all.
Okay, so why do you love her and not always like her? This is like what I'm trying to clarify.
Well, I birthed her, so there's that connection. I made her with my husband, so there's that connection. She has so many positive attributes that, and she has my personality. I know that. So I know I love her and I see myself in her. So maybe that's what I don't like. Maybe it's, there's parts of me that I see in her that I'm like, and that's where the hard part is for me. But at the end of the day, I love her. I don't always like her behavior. That's probably what it is. I don't like her behavior.
You don't like her behavior. Okay.
Yeah.
I
don't always like my husband's behavior, but I love him. And I'm like, Sharon said, she used the word ease. What came to mind for me was flow. Like there's a fluidity, there's a flow, there's an ease. It always kind of comes back to, we're going to be okay. It's just, we still love each other. But there's trust there too. Like I trust my husband. We've been through stuff together. So it's like, I get the trust. My kids trust me. I don't know. This is such an interesting conversation and things to think through.
I think with the person that you love, you feel a high level of emotional security.
There you go. That's it.
I think
That's what it is.
I think we all really need that at our core. And when another person makes you feel that security, I think that sort of facilitates loving feelings, a really serious connection.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. What do you think,
That's
Michael?
good.
Well, I'm going to have some overlap and some difference. And,
I'm excited.
and so my first thing will kind of be a coverall, which says, I think love is kind of like spirituality, and the fact, I was going to say God because that's my faith, but I didn't want to be, imposing anything on anyone.
We like to hear your perspective.
I think if you can fully define love, then it's really not worth much. I think there's something about awe and a mystery that makes love so special that we cannot fully conceptualize it. I think it has too many contexts, including trust, because I think, I have a love for humans. Mm-hmm. I have a love for people that I don't necessarily care for, or don't understand, and some of that, I don't trust. And some of that stuff gets in the way of wanting to maybe be close to them, but it doesn't stop me from wishing that whatever their life is, whatever it is they need, gets fulfilled. Right. And so there, that's kind of the more distant measure. The loving while not liking, where I break it down a little more personal, is I think love has more to do with our capacity than it does with the other person. So, for instance, like you said, you can hold your wife's hand or whatever and say, I love you, even if I don't like you right now. Because I think the capacity is something greater than what you're feeling in the moment. The momentary situation, kind of like contentment or joy or peace, or how, people have different words for that internal state of being. Mm-hmm. And so the love is there, and the like, whether we say it's, I don't like your behaviors, or I don't like this situation, or I just kind of don't like you right now, to me is really more about just a situational feeling. Mm-hmm. Whereas love is a greater concept that is really your anchor. So no matter what the ship's doing up here, that love is just really anchored deep. That says, no, my capacity to love you is greater than the frustration we're having right now, the teenager who's acting up, because mine are now older, but but they were there. Oh, dear Lord, were they there?
Right.
And so, yeah, I don't think there's any one definition that, at least I'll own my own stuff, that I can come up with, because I think it's just too doggone great. Yeah. But that is, that's the best I can come up with. And then again, I think when you listen to Lisa, April, and Sharon, and then you hear their perspectives, you'll hear overlap, you'll hear difference. That to me is the beauty of it, is there's not a one love, because my love is not going to work for you, and your love's not going to work for her or him, or, completely. And so to me, that awe and intrigue and mystery, that's what keeps it from being fully definable. Yeah,
I really love that. I think that's a great way to break it down. Love is more sort of expansive, and like is more temporal. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so I am going to have to stop asking the question of what's the definition of love.
Because we nailed it. We nailed it.
Yeah. It's a mystery, and every person has to know and not even define it for themselves, but just
there's
feel
different
it for themselves.
And there's different kinds of love too. Like, there's romantic love, there's, love for human being, like just being a human and loving other people, and, wanting the best for others, even if we don't like that person and their behaviors. I mean, I love what you shared, Michael. I'm just like, that was just amazing. Thank you for that perspective.
Thank you. Fantastic way to end this recording. Thank you so much, guys. Your insights were incredible. I really like the energy coming from each of you, of the overlap and the differences. So I appreciate you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Oh my gosh.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
That's all for this episode of the Life Picks University podcast, but I have a huge favor to ask of you that will not only support the show, but will also help the people you love most. We are striving for 1 million downloads by the end of 2025, and we can't do this without your help. If you love this episode, please share it with 2 of your family and friends so they too can rewire their brains to have an extraordinary marriage. It was awesome spending time with you, and I'll see you on the next episode.